Hello, hi, welcome all the would-be lifesavers. This is your KK sir. Yes, welcome back to one more lecture from our KK NEET Biology. In this session, we are going to discuss menstrual cycle. And before jumping into our session, one must know what is the use of menstrual cycle and what is the menstrual cycle and what are the key things which we are going to learn in this session. Right, first we must understand what is the need of menstrual cycle. We know that the menstrual cycle is. What is the need of menstrual cycle? What are all these cyclic changes which are taking in the reproductive system, female reproductive system in a cyclic manner? What is cyclic manner? Some changes are going to repeated with a particular period of time. So that means we can say these are the cyclic changes. Say for example, within the 28 days, some changes are going to take place in the female reproductive system. Same changes again, they are going to repeated and repeated again and again. So that we are calling this is a menstrual cycle, right? And what is the importance of menstrual cycle? If we check the importance of the menstrual cycle, when in this particular stipulated time, in this particular 28 days of time, so many changes are going to be taken inside the body of the female. Like levels of the different hormones are going to be raised and levels of the different hormones are going to be decreased in a particular stipulated days, and the ovulation is going to take place, and so many changes are going to be taken inside the uterus. That is the endometrial changes. So endometrium is going to develop. So what is the need of all these things in the sense? Here, if the fertilization takes place, the growing embryo needs carbon dioxide, okay, and it's going to excrete some of the excretory material, and it needs oxygen and it needs food. So for all these things, this particular womb has to be adapted, right? For this adaptation, endometrial changes takes place inside the uterus, right? If such changes takes place, then only the embryo can survive inside the uterus. Otherwise, it can't survive, right? This is the need of menstrual cycle. And changes which are taking place inside the uterus, as well as different hormones also going to be produced, and later on we are going to discuss what are the different kinds of changes takes place in the female reproductive system. So without that, we are going to jump into our session, and one of the diagrams has been given you in your textbook, so which we can later on going to discuss about this one. Right, here is the diagram we are going to discuss, because this is a very important diagram, because so many questions were asked in the previous NEET examinations. And what are the levels of different hormones like pituitary hormones and ovarian hormones, and these are all these things, and follicular changes and corpus luteum, and this is the endometrial layer which is present inside the uterus. So what are the different changes are going to be taken in these things, right? So later on we are going to discuss this one. Now directly we are going to jump into our session, that is the menstrual cycle. It's a very easy one, and you have to remember so many things in this one. So we are going to discuss in this session menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle is a reproductive tract changes. Simply we can say menstrual cycle. So these are the cyclic changes which are taking place inside the cyclic changes. These are cyclic changes which are taking place inside the body of female, cyclic changes, right? So generally it takes place in the primates, such as, so you have to remember these examples too. Primates, generally this in the monkeys, and human beings, and some of the primates. So these menstrual cycle is going to take place in the primates. If this kind of change is taking place in the non-primates, so if the menstrual cycle is taking place in the non-primates, then we can call it as estrous cycle. So remember this one. If it is happening, if the cyclic changes is happening in the primates, then we can call it as menstrual cycle. If it is taking place in the non-primate animals such as dog, so we can call it as estrous cycle. So estrous cycle also, that time also in some non-primates, so many changes takes place, right? And to easily understand our menstrual cycle, so we can divide this menstrual cycle into different phases. So these particular 28 days of period, we can divide into 4 stages. And before that, so this menstrual cycle generally it starts in puberty, and the first menstrual cycle is known as menarche. So remember this one. So this is a very important in case of the examination. And so this particular menstrual cycle, it may be ceased. Ceased means it may be stopped at the age of 50. Generally this is known as menopause. So name itself saying, so name itself denoting, name itself explaining us meno in the sense menstrual cycle, pause in the sense stop. So this word itself saying that if the menstrual cycle is being stopped, then that particular phenomenon is known as menopause. So that may be in case of age, and sometimes, so this is temporarily ceased. Sometimes this menstrual cycle is temporarily ceased. If you are preparing NEET examination, sometimes you may undergo the stress. In that condition also, if at all, if you have poor health, then that time also this particular menstrual cycle is going to be temporarily ceased. What? In case of stress or in case of poor health. So this poor health, then the menstrual cycle is temporarily ceased. Mind it, mind this word. The menstrual cycle is being temporarily ceased when you are under stress, when you have the poor health, then in that cases temporarily ceased. So this is the permanent ceasing of the menstrual cycle when they attain the age of, and the female attain the age of around 50, not exactly 50, it could be sometimes, it could be 45 years in some case of females, and it could be sometimes, it could be 50, or else it could be plus or minus 2 years, right? So this is the permanent ceasing of menstrual cycle. So this is known as menopause. Now we are going to divide this particular menstrual cycle in 4 ways, 4 stages we can say. So one is menstruation phase, and second one is follicular phase, or else we can say proliferative phase, right? Proliferative phase. So we got so many stages, and we are, for our convenience, we are going to divide this particular menstrual cycle into different stages. One is menstrual phase, second one is follicular phase, or it can be said as proliferative phase 2. Remember this one, because sometimes in the options you may get proliferative phase, and sometimes you may be asked as follicular phase. And third one is luteal phase. Luteal phase, or else this is known as secretory phase. So after a follicular phase, again this particular menstruation phase restarts. So here in between these two, follicular phase as well as the luteal phase, you can find one more phase, that is ovulation, or else ovulator phase we can see. Right, let's going to discuss one by one. That is the first phase, is the menstrual phase. What happens in the menstrual phase? What are the changes taking place in the menstrual phase? We'll see that. So first one is menstrual phase. So what happens in the menstrual phase? Now, when we are studying or reading about the menstrual cycle, we must focus on each and every point, as well as the levels, how the hormones are being produced. The levels of the hormones, different hormones. So here the menstrual cycle is going to affected by 2 kinds of hormones. One is pituitary hormones, and second one is ovarian hormones. We know that pituitary hormones, we got 2 types. One is FSH and second one is luteinizing hormone, and first one is follicular stimulating hormone. And from the ovarian hormones, we got 2 types of ovarian hormones. One is estrogen, and second one is progesterone. These are the different hormones which are going to show their impact on the menstrual cycle, right? Now the menstrual phase. Generally, this menstrual phase takes place around 3 to 5 days. what happens in this menstrual phase? Menstruation happen. Menstruation in the sense, what is that? Menstruation in the sense here, the endometrium along with blood vessels, fine blood vessels, they come out of the birth canal. So this particular phase is known as menstruation, right? 3 to 5 days it happens. Okay, and what happens still in the menstrual phase? Here, see here, menstrual phase generally takes place 3 to 5 days. And coming to second phase, that is proliferative phase, or else other one, this is known as follicular phase. So it is stopped. The menstruation phase is stopped at the day of 5th day. It is stopped at 5th day. So gradually what happens? Next day starts proliferative or else follicular phase starts from 6th to 13th or 14th day. So sometimes in the examination it could be asked that what is the days of proliferative phase. So it could be start from 6th day. Some people may this menstrual phase maybe extends from 6th day. If it is menstrual phase is up to 6th day and proliferative is going to be started 7th day to 13th or 14th day. So generally menstrual cycle completely it takes place 28 to 29 days. So these particular changes, cyclic changes, so whatever we said earlier, so for that, so 28 to 29 days takes place, right? So here the proliferative or else follicular phase generally it takes place up to the mid days of menstrual cycle. That means here the 14th day or else up to 13th day this takes place, right? What happens in the proliferative phase? The name itself is suggesting us proliferative means it is becoming bigger in size or the amount is going to be increased. The meaning of the proliferation means the amount or the number is going to be increased or the size is going to be increased. So what kind of size is going to, what is the size, which size is increased here? And follicular phase, otherwise we are saying it as a follicular phase. So completely here the follicle means the Graafian follicle. So here in this phase what happens? The primary follicle turn into Graafian follicle. So already we have discussed in the previous last sessions when we were dealing with female reproductive system. So what are the primary follicle and what is the secondary follicle, tertiary follicle and Graafian follicles? All these things we were discussed in the last session, right? So this primary follicle is going to turn or transform into the Graafian follicle in this particular period, right? Again here we have to focus on the hormones, right? Now follicle stimulating hormone must be produced, right? As well as luteinizing hormone also should be produced in these particular days. Up to the 13th day, follicular stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone, these are going to reach their peak levels. Now see, for example, here this is the 6th day and this is the 13th day. Here we are reaching. So after a while we are going to discuss that graph. So like this, so these are going to raise their levels up to 13th day of the menstrual cycle. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, these hormone levels are going to reach their peak, right? And what about this estrogen? So estrogen and the progesterone, these are the ovarian hormones because they are secreted by the ovaries, right? So estrogen as well as progesterone. So progesterone levels are going to be stable in this period. So if the progesterone level is like this, so it will be parallel only. So the amount of the progesterone is not going to be increased in this particular proliferative or follicular phase, but the estrogen levels. So from where the estrogen is going to be secreted? So the estrogen is going to be secreted from the development follicle. So there are so many different kind of secretory cells around the primary or secondary follicle, right? So these cells are going to secrete the estrogen. That's what the estrogen levels also increased in this phase. So, but the progesterone level is maintained constantly. So, the amount of the progesterone is not going to be increased in this level. So, you must remember all these things. When it is reaching the 14th day, around 14th day. So, what happened? LH surge happens. What is the meaning of surge? Releasing of more amount of luteinizing hormone. Releasing of more amount of the luteinizing hormone. So, it results ovulation. It results ovulation. That means a rupture of the Graafian follicle takes place, as well as the ovum which is present inside the Graafian follicle, it is going to be released out. At the end of follicular phase, what is happening here? Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormones, their levels are going to be reached peak, as well as the estrogen also going to be raised at the end of follicular phase. So, at the end of follicular phase means what happens? This is the mid time of the menstrual cycle, or we can say before starting of the next, that is secretory phase or luteal phase. What is happening? So, see, you must concentrate on here, because these things what are the happening here, it could be asked in two ways. So, that is one thing is at the end of follicular phase what happens, or else at the starting of luteal phase what happens, or else it can be asked in other way too. So, between this particular proliferative phase and the luteal phase, so what could be the situations over there? You must remember everything. So, you must remember these levels are reached high, okay, these hormones, follicle stimulating hormone, LH, as well as estrogen. So, these hormones, the three hormones, their amount is going to be reached high, as well as here LH surge happens at the end of the follicular phase, so that the ovulation takes place. The Graafian follicle is going to be ruptured, as well as the ovum which is present inside is going to be released out. So, this particular process that we know ovulation, the particular process known as ovulation. So, this is what happens in the proliferative phase. And next one is after the proliferative phase, we can see that is secretory phase. Or else we can say that as luteal phase. So, next the third one is secretory phase, as well as, or else we can say luteal phase. You must remember these two words compulsory, right? So, what happens in the luteal phase actually? So, luteal phase, before luteal phase what happens? The ovulation took place, right? So, the ovum came out of that particular Graafian follicle. In the secretory phase what happens? Graafian follicle transform into corpus luteum, right? Corpus luteum. That's what here we are calling it as a luteal phase. The particular corpus luteum is going to play a vital role in this particular stage, so that this particular stage is known as luteal phase. What happens? Corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone. Now, the progesterone levels are going to reach peak. They are going to reach at peak in the secretory phase. Why? Because here progesterone is very useful for the implantation of embryo, right? That's what here the progesterone levels going to peak in this particular luteal phase. Why are we calling it as secretory phase? The particular corpus luteum which is formed from the Graafian follicle, it is going to secrete the progesterone. That's what we are calling it as the secretory phase. And here what happens? The endometrium is fully developed to accommodate upcoming embryo, fully developed for upcoming embryo. If the egg is fertilized, and the zygote is formed and is going to be attached to the uterus walls. So, after attaching this particular uterus walls, what happens? The embryo has to be supplied oxygen, right, as well as nutrients. So, all these nutrients has to be supplied to the embryo. That's what the endometrium is going to fully developed, to provide nutrients, to provide oxygen to the upcoming embryo. That's what here the endometrium is going to develop fully in the secretory phase or luteal phase. Whereas here in the first phase also, this one, what is this? Follicular phase also, the endometrium is going to develop slowly. But in case of this phase, the endometrium is going to develop high. So, because the endometrium is fully developed in this particular phase. And what is the next phase is? Next again the menstrual phase, menstruation phase starts. So, if the egg is fertilized, then this endometrium will be like that only. So, it is not going to be shed off from the uterus. If the fertilization doesn't take place, what happens? The endometrium is going to shed off. Again that particular first phase, what we have discussed, the first particular phase, that is menstrual phase, again it is going to be started. So, ultimately the endometrium is going to shed off from the uterus, as well as the ovum which is already released, as well as these blood vessels also. So, these three things, they come out as the menstrual flow from the birth canal to the out, right. So, this is the what happens in the menstrual phase and menstrual. These are all about the menstrual cycle, and we are going to discuss now that one. What is that? The menstrual cycle, the diagram which is given in your textbook. We are going to discuss this one. It's very easy one. First, so don't be afraid of this one. So, by seeing these diagrams, many people are afraid. So, need not to afraid this one, about this one. So, it's very easy one. First, we have to observe what are the things given in the x-axis and y-axis, right. Let us see. So, this is the x-axis. In the x-axis, the days have been given from 1 to 29th. Again here one has been given. You just look at this one. So, 1 means again it is going to restart from here. So, from first day to 29th or 28 days we can say. So, this is the menstrual cycle generally happens. And in the y-axis, so uterus events, how the endometrium is going to be developed and how this endometrium is going to shed off from the uterus, as well as the hormone levels also here given, ovarian hormones. So, that is the estrogen, second one is the progesterone, and here the ovarian events in the sense, what are the events, what are the physical changes are taking place inside the ovary, here these are the ovarian changes, right. And these are the ovarian hormones, remember clearly, and these are the hormones which are released from the pituitary gland. So, they are, one is follicle stimulating hormone, second one is luteinizing hormone. Now, we will see here what is the menstruation phase here, up to 3 days or 3 to or 5 days here, up to here. So, up to here what is happening, see, menstrual flow is coming out. So, here the red indicates the menstrual flow. So, here we can see if the ovarian hormones level, that is estrogen and progesterone. So, they are very stable, and the developing Graafian follicle, see you can see that. So, the Graafian follicle taking some changes, very few changes, and granulosa cells are formed around the primary oocyte. Okay, so some of the changes are taking place, and here also you can see the follicle stimulating hormone as well as the luteinizing hormone. Here the blue line is indicating luteinizing hormone level, and the red line is indicating the follicle stimulating hormone level. So, these are the very quite common changes in the menstruation phase, right. And we'll come to the next phase, that is follicular phase or proliferative phase. Now, you can see. Now, first we will see the uterine events. What is happening in the uterus? Okay. So, this is the endometrium. So, remember that this is the endometrium. This is indicating the endometrium. Now, the blood vessels are going to be increased, and the cells, glandular epithelium is going to be increased. See here, it is gradually increasing in the follicular phase. It is taking place up to 14th or 15th day, like that. Okay. And this is the uterus events, and you can see the levels of estrogen is reaching peak at the end of follicular phase, right. As well as the levels of progesterone is very stable here. You must remember the levels of the hormones. So, in which stage which hormone is high, and in which stage which hormone is very low, and in which stage which hormone levels are very stable, like that you must remember each and every point. This is the follicular phase, or else proliferative phase also we can say, because here the proliferation is happening. See here, look this particular event. So, the proliferation is happening here, as well as here also the proliferation is happening in the tissue of the endometrium. Here also the proliferation is happening in the size and shape of the particular ovarian follicles, right. So, that is what we are calling it as a proliferative phase, right. Here the endometrium is being developed gradually, slowly it is being developed, right. So, estrogen levels are high here, and the luteinizing hormone levels are going to peak, and even the particular follicle stimulating hormones levels also going high level here, right? So they are reaching their high levels at the end of follicular phase. You must remember this one. And coming to here, so this particular 14th day, so 14th day, what is happening here? The ovulation is taking place. So it may be plus or minus 1 day to 14, right? It could be sometime, it may be happen 13th day, or it could be happen on the 15th day itself, maybe, right? Actually around it could takes place at 14th day of the menstrual cycle, right? So here the ovulation is taking place. Now the ovum is coming out of the Graafian follicle, and see here, you can see on the 14th day luteinizing hormones is very high. So here, see here, you can see the LH surge. LH surge is suddenly more amount of LH is going to be released. You can see the peak here. You can see the peak here. See, suddenly it is up to here. This levels of the luteinizing hormone is normal. So it is this levels of the luteinizing hormone is normal, and it is maintained stably. But when it is reaching to the around the 12th day like that, suddenly the amount of the LH is going to be raised very high. So this particular raising of LH is known as LH surge. This is known as LH surge. So as a result, so here the ovulation is taking place, and we'll come to the next one, that is luteal phase or secretory phase. So here, from here, even more endometrium is going to be developed. Now the development of the endometrium also reaching peak stage in the luteal phase or else secretory phase. Now the more blood vessels and more arteries and more veins are developed in this particular phase, luteal phase, and you can see the estrogen progesterone levels also. You can see here estrogen progesterone levels also reaching peak in the luteal phase. Even here, if you take a follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone, their levels are coming down. See, you can observe it. You can observe very clearly. You must remember the levels of the hormones. The levels of the hormones are very important. So in case of luteal phase, estrogen and progesterone levels are reaching high, as well as here, if you see the pituitary hormone, that is luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, they are coming down in the luteal phase or else secretory phase. So their levels are coming down in the luteal phase. You must remember the levels of the hormones as well as the endometrial changes taking place. And here you can see this is the luteal phase we are calling, because the Graafian follicle is transforming into the corpus luteum. This is the developing corpus luteum. So it's going to secrete the progesterone hormone, which is very essential. You can see this, the levels of progesterone is more in the luteal phase, right? So if the fertilization takes place here, the progesterone becomes more and more. So no Graafian follicle is going to be developed further, and this particular corpus luteum is going to be retained like that, as well as it's going to secrete the progesterone, which is very essential for the implantation of the embryo. So these are the different changes taking place. See here, see if the fertilization is not taking place, what happens here? So regression of corpus luteum. So that means it's going to be what happens, it's going to be degenerated, as well as, see, if it is degenerating in the sense, the progesterone is coming down. See, this is the progesterone line, this is the red one. So this levels of the progesterone is coming down. So as a result, again this particular endometrium is going to shut off. So that is here again menstrual flow is going to be start. So this particular endometrium layers and tissue, as well as these blood vessels which are present in, it's coming out as menstrual flow. So this is what happened in the menstrual cycle, right? And let us see the fertilization. Let us see how the fertilization takes place and what are the different events in the fertilization. Let us see the fertilization, right? Next process is fertilization, right? Fertilization process. We know that the fertilization meaning that the fusion of sperm and ovum is known as fertilization. As a result, this zygote is going to be formed. So we know that this zygote is in the diploid state. So the sperm is in haploid state as well as the ovum in haploid state. how this particular fertilization takes place and where the fertilization process is going to be take place. Here the fertilization process is going to take place in the, actually in our textbook, in the NCERT biology textbook, it has been given as in the ampullary region, in the ampullary region of, in the ampullary region of fallopian tube, right. But if you take, if you observe the fingertips, it has been given as, so junction of, junction, it is a junction of, it is a junction of ampullary, ampullary and isthmus. If examiner asks, if at all options are given, these two, ampullary region as well as the junction of ampullary isthmus region. So if these both options are given, so you must tick the ampullary isthmus region. So these, when the sperm is reaching the particular ampullary region, simultaneously ovum has to come from the fallopian tube, from that side, that end. So that is the infundibulum, and it has to reach the ampullary region, and from here the sperm has to pass and it has to swim through the birth canal and it has to enter into the uterus. So we know that the prostaglandins which are secreted, they are useful in the contraction of the uterus, which can accommodate the sperm to swim into, or else the contraction of the uterus, it may pushes these sperms into the fallopian tube, through the isthmus into the ampullary region, right. Here the ampullary region, so here the fertilization takes place in the human beings. This is a very important one. And what happens now? This is the ovum, and we know that there is a particular layer around this particular ovum, so that is known as zona pellucida, right. This is the zona pellucida, and actually this is not the ovum actually. So this we call it as a secondary oocyte. Now it has not yet been undergone meiosis II, remember it, because in the ovulation period the ovum is released in the stage of secondary oocyte, though it is in haploid state, remember that point. So now this is secondary oocyte, no meiosis II took place yet, right. So this is the zona pellucida. When the sperm is come in contact with zona pellucida, what happens? Zona pellucida. Now it is coming contact with the zona pellucida. There is a particular stage, there is a particular structure on the head of the sperm, that we know that is acrosome. This is acrosome, which facilitate the fertilization process, right. So acrosome has so many kinds of enzymes, that is, one is acrosin and hyaluronidase and cortical enzymes. So remember those enzymes. These acrosome particular structure which is present on the head of this sperm, it has some kinds of enzyme which facilitate the fertilization. It's going to react with the zona pellucida in order to what is it? It's going to lyse. It's going to dissolve the layer around the ovum. And one more reaction also takes place. First we'll see this one. So this is the acrosome. It has the acrosin as well as hyaluronidase as well as some cortical enzymes. So after releasing these enzymes, what happened? They are going to react with the zona pellucida, and this particular area, whatever the area here the ovum has, that is known as reception cone. From there itself the ovum is this particular sperm is going to enter inside. So this head is going to be particular head of the sperm is going to enter into the secondary oocyte. So at the same time, what happens here? Cortical reaction also takes place. What is a cortical reaction? Here? This particular layer around the ovum is going to become, it's going to undergo some kinds of chemical changes which is going to block some other sperms not to enter into the ooze. What is that? Ovum. See here, once the sperm is entering into the ovum, it should see that no other sperm enter into the ovum. What happens if other sperm also enters? What happens here? This particular sperm contains 23 of chromosomes, and this particular secondary oocyte or ovum, we'll just call it as ovum. So 23. So what happens here? The fusion is taking place in between these two. As a result, 46 number of chromosomes is formed. So now this becomes a human being. See, once this sperm is entering and some other sperm also trying to enter into this one, and assume that this sperm also entered, what happens? 23 more chromosomes also going to be formed in this one. So ultimately it's going to lead the formation of 69 chromosomes in the zygote. So it may be it could not be the human being. So once the sperm is entered into the ovum, so it should see that, it should take care that no other sperm should not enter into the ovum. So that's what some kind of chemical changes undergo in this zona pellucida or around the ovum, so that this going to become tough. So it's going to block some other sperms not to enter into the ovum. This particular process, this particular reaction is known as cortical reaction. Remember this word, cortical reaction is nothing but the sperm is going to block other sperms not to enter into the ovum, So by some chemical changes takes place around this particular ovum. So this is known as cortical reaction. Remember this one, okay? And what happens here? So you remember each and every event of the fertilization process, right? So now whenever it is coming, the sperm is its head is entering into the ovum. What happens? Now the meiosis 2 is taking place inside the ovum. So this is the ovum. Now this is the nucleus. Now this nucleus is going to divide as secondary polar body, and one more. This is the ovum. This is the ovular nucleus, right? So this particular whatever the cell, whatever the daughter cell is formed by the division of mitosis 2, second polar body is formed, as well as here this we call it as oocyte, and later on it is going to change as ovum, right? Remember this one once the question is asked. So when the meiosis 2 takes place in case of ovum, so generally the ovum is released in the stage of secondary oocyte. When the sperm come in contact with the secondary oocyte, then only meiosis 2 take place. As a result, secondary polar body is going to be created and the ovum is going to be generated. So before that, that ovum, particular ovum, is known as oocyte. Now these nucleus of both the cells are going to be fused with each other. As a result, the zygote is going to be formed. So this zygote is going to be attached to the uterus wall. That particular process is known as implantation. The progesterone plays a vital role in case of the implantation, right? So this is the fertilization process. So who is a mother or father who is going to decide the sex of the baby? We know that the father is going to decide the sex of the baby, right? So ultimately the father is going to release two kinds of sperms. So 2 kinds of sperms. So 50% of the sperms, they contain 22 plus X chromosome, right? And 50% of the sperms, they contain 22 plus Y chromosome. So the male is going to release 2 kinds of sperms. Mind it, 2 kinds of sperms they are going to release. So 50% of the sperms, they contain 22 autosomes along with X chromosome, and 22 autosomes along with one sex chromosome, that is Y chromosome, right? Generally the female release only one kind of form. They have only 22 autosomes plus X chromosome. So ultimately they have the one set of chromosome, that is 23 chromosomes. Here also 23 chromosomes are present in each and every sperm. When comparing with the female, here the 2 kinds of sperms are going to be released. If this particular sperm fuses with this ovum, what happens here? 44 autosomes along with XX chromosome. So now this becomes the female baby. If this particular sperm is going to fuse with this, what happens here? 44 plus XY chromosome. That is, these are the sex chromosomes or allosomes we can say. So if this particular zygote contains 44 plus XY chromosome and this resulting into the male baby and this resulting into female baby if they have XX chromosome. In this way, sex is going to be determined at the time of fertilization itself, right. So remember these things. Next we are going to discuss in the next lecture, we are going to discuss that particular implantation, after implantation what happens, how the embryonic embryonic layers are formed and how the embryo is going to develop and what are the things, what are the changes taking place in the embryo. All these things we are going to discuss in the next lecture. And after this one, next lecture, what were the questions asked from the menstrual cycle in the NEET previous examination, we are going to discuss in the next session, right. We'll meet you in the next session. Till next session, have a great day.